She thought it was just another blind date, until her confession about not affording coffee changed everything and put her life in the hands of a millionaire CEO. Emma Collins never liked blind dates. They always felt like job interviews disguised as evenings out. The polite smiles, the quick judgments, the awkward pauses. But tonight was different. She hadn't agreed to this date because she was searching for romance. She had agreed because she was exhausted. Because her best friend had begged her to take at least one night off from running herself ragged, and because she had nothing left to lose. The cafe was small, tucked into a corner of Manhattan that still smelled faintly of brick dust and subway heat. Its neon sign flickered over the frosted window. Coffee. Inside, the chatter of students and office workers buzzed over the hiss of the espresso machine. Couples leaned in close. Friends laughed over pastries, and every table carried the warmth of normalcy. The kind of normal Emma hadn't felt in years. She sat stiffly, smoothing the creases of her secondhand blouse, her fingers twisting the strap of her purse. Her cracked phone screen lit up with reminders. Rent due tomorrow. Pharmacy bill past due. Call landlord. Each one stabbed her in the ribs like a hidden blade. She silenced the phone, tucked it away, and tried to breathe. The man arrived with the quiet confidence of someone who belonged wherever he walked. Tall, dark-haired, clean-shaven, with sharp brown eyes and a suit that looked far too expensive for this tiny cafe, he seemed like he had stepped out of another world. He carried no trace of hesitation as he crossed to her table. "Emma?" His voice was warm, steady. She nodded, surprised at how easily his presence filled the space. "Yes, you must be Nathan." He smiled. Not the practiced, slick smile of someone used to impressing, but something softer. He slid into the seat across from her, and for a moment she wondered if he was disappointed by the sight of her. The tired eyes, the fraying cuffs, the worn shoes that told stories of every long shift and every night walking home. The waiter appeared, pad in hand. Nathan glanced at Emma. "What would you like?" The question should have been simple. It wasn't. Emma felt her throat tighten, shame curling hot in her chest. She could have lied. She could have pretended she wasn't counting every cent in her head. But something about the day, about her frayed nerves, about the way his eyes seemed too steady, broke her usual defense. "Nothing," she whispered. Then more firmly, I can't afford coffee." The silence that followed was deafening. Her cheeks burned. She waited for the flicker of pity, the awkward shift, the thin smile that always came when people realized how thin her mask was. She wanted to shrink into the chair, to vanish into the crack between floorboards, but Nathan didn't flinch. Instead, his brow furrowed, and then he smiled. A real smile, unexpected and disarming. "Then I'll order two. One for you, one for me. And maybe a cookie, too. I think we both need it." Emma blinked, startled. "You don't have to." "I want to," he interrupted gently, already handing the waiter the order. "And besides, honesty deserves a reward." She stared at him, unsure if he was mocking her, but the calm certainty in his tone told her he wasn't. For the first time in a long time, someone hadn't treated her confession like a wound to be hidden. He had treated it like a beginning. When the coffees arrived, he slid one toward her. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I'll handle the coffee. You handle the truth. Fair deal?" She wrapped her hands around the warm cup, her throat aching with words she never let herself speak aloud. And for the first time, Emma thought maybe this night wasn't a mistake. Maybe the strangest, most humiliating sentence she had ever uttered. "I can't afford coffee," was the one that might finally change something. The night air outside the cafe was crisp, carrying the scent of roasted chestnuts from a nearby vendor and the faint bite of winter settling over the city. Emma stepped out with her paper cup clutched between her hands, its warmth sinking into her fingers. She had expected the coffee to taste bitter, but it didn't. It tasted like a luxury, almost unreal, like something borrowed from another life. Nathan held his cup easily, one hand in the pocket of his tailored coat. His posture relaxed in a way that contrasted sharply with the restless pace of people hurrying past them. "Mind if we walk?" he asked, tilting his head toward the side street lined with flickering lampposts. Emma hesitated. Her first instinct was always to decline, to keep her walls up. But something in his tone wasn't commanding. It was curious, almost gentle. She nodded and they fell into step together. They walked in silence for a block, the crunch of footsteps on salted pavement filling the gap. Emma found herself hyper-aware of the difference between them. He looked like he belonged in sleek restaurants and boardrooms, someone who never had to count coins at the bottom of his purse. She felt like a shadow beside him, her thrift store coat worn thin at the elbows, her boots scuffed from too many seasons. "You said you couldn't afford coffee," Nathan said finally. Not as a challenge, but as though he was still turning the words over in his head. Most people would have pretended. Ordered water, made an excuse. "Why didn't you?" Emma let out a brittle laugh. "Because I'm tired of pretending. Pretending I'm fine. Pretending things aren't falling apart. It's exhausting. And I guess tonight I didn't have the energy to play the game." Nathan glanced at her, his brow knit as though her answer unsettled him. Falling apart? She tightened her grip on the cup. The words were dangerous. Once released, they couldn't be taken back. But something about the anonymity of this moment, about walking through the city with a man who was still a stranger, loosened her tongue. "I lost my job at the campus cafe when the place shut down. Since then, I've been piecing things together. Deliveries, night shifts. My brother has asthma. When he gets sick, the hospital bills," her voice cracked, "and the rent's due tomorrow. If I don't pay, they'll throw us out." Her admission hung between them, raw and heavy. She braced for the awkward pause, for the polite murmur of sympathy. Instead, Nathan stopped walking. He turned to her fully, his eyes catching the dim lamplight. They were sharper up close, but not cold. "You're doing all this alone?" She swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "What other choice do I have?" For a moment his expression shifted, something like recognition, or maybe memory. He looked down at his coffee, exhaled slowly, and started walking again. "I know what it's like," he said finally. "Different circumstances, maybe, but being left to carry everything on your own. I know that weight." Emma blinked at him, startled. "You?" "Really?" He nodded, his voice quieter now. "I got divorced 3 years ago. Raising my son, Max, is the best and hardest thing I've ever done. The work doesn't stop. The pressure doesn't stop. Some days it feels like the whole world wants to remind you that you're on your own." They reached a bench beneath a street lamp dusted with snow. Nathan gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself carefully, her hands wrapped around the cooling cup, while he settled beside her. For a few moments neither spoke. The city moved around them. Cars passing, a siren in the distance, laughter spilling from a nearby bar. But the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was strange, comfortable. Emma gave a short, shaky laugh. "This is officially the weirdest blind date I've ever been on. No small talk, no compliments. Just two people comparing battle scars." Nathan's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Maybe that's what makes it worth something. No games, just truth." She stared down at her cup, her throat tight with emotions she didn't want to name. For so long, she had been holding her world together with fraying strings, terrified of anyone seeing how close it all was to breaking. And now here she was, confessing it to a man she had known for less than an hour. She looked up at him again, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she didn't feel completely invisible. And that, she realized, was more frightening than all the bills, all the threats of eviction, all the sleepless nights. Because hope, however small, however fragile, was the one thing she could least afford. The next evening, Emma sat at the rickety kitchen table of her apartment, her hands wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm tea. The peeling wallpaper curled at the edges, and the radiator clanked weakly against the cold. Noah lay asleep in the next room, his wheezing breaths uneven, the sound of the inhaler still lingering in Emma's ears. She had gotten through another day. Barely. Her phone vibrated, its harsh buzz echoing through the silence. She glanced at the screen and froze. Westward Properties. Her landlord. Her stomach twisted as she answered. "Miss Collins," the voice on the other end was brisk, detached, rehearsed. "This is your final notice. Unless full payment is made by 9 a.m. tomorrow, we'll be arriving with the sheriff to proceed with eviction." Her throat tightened. "Please, my brother is sick. I just need a little more time." But the line was already dead. Emma set the phone down with trembling hands. A mix of anger and despair clawed at her chest. She wanted to scream, to cry, but she had neither the strength nor the privacy. She pressed her fists against her eyes, fighting back tears, when suddenly her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Nathan. "Are you home?" The message read, She hesitated, her thumb hovering over the screen. What could he do? What should she even tell him? But before she could answer, there was a knock at the door. Emma's heart raced. She padded quietly across the worn carpet and opened the door just a crack. Nathan stood in the hallway, his dark coat dusted with snow, his expression unreadable. Beside him was a woman in a wool coat, holding a leather briefcase. Emma, Nathan said softly, may we come in? She hesitated, then opened the door wider. He stepped inside, bringing with him the crisp air of winter and the scent of cologne that seemed too refined for this building. The woman followed, nodding politely. This is Mira Lynn, Nathan introduced. She's a housing attorney. She'll explain. Emma blinked, her pulse pounding in her ears. I don't understand. Why are you? Nathan held up a folded sheet of paper, the eviction notice she had received earlier that day. Because of this, he said, and because it's my responsibility. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean, your responsibility? He exhaled slowly as though bracing himself. Westward Properties is a subsidiary of my company. Cole Venture Group. Emma's breath caught. For a moment, the world tilted. You're saying this is your company? Indirectly, Nathan admitted. I don't run the day-to-day for every property. But the truth is, I own the group that owns the landlord who sent you this notice. And that means when I saw your name on this paper, he trailed off, his jaw tightening. It means I couldn't ignore it. Emma staggered back a step, her mind reeling. The man she had sat across from just last night, who had listened to her talk about bills and rent, who had walked with her through the snow, he wasn't just another single parent trying to survive. He was the very face of the machine that had been suffocating her. You're him, she whispered, her voice breaking. You're the reason we're living like this. Nathan's eyes darkened. I'm the reason this system exists, yes. And I should have seen it sooner. But I'm also the one who can stop this from happening to you, and to others like you. If you'll let me. Her chest rose and fell in sharp, shallow breaths. She wanted to scream at him, to shove him out the door, to slam the lock and never look back. But she also wanted to collapse into the promise she thought she heard in his voice, that desperate flicker of something human behind the polished exterior. Mira set her briefcase on the table, her calm, precise voice breaking the silence. I've already filed an emergency injunction. The eviction is temporarily halted until the legality of the rent increase can be reviewed. You're safe for now, Miss Collins. Emma pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Safe? The word barely felt real. Nathan stepped closer, his eyes searching hers. I can't undo what you've been through, but I can make sure tomorrow morning no sheriff shows up at your door. Emma's hands dropped to her sides, her voice hoarse. You're asking me to trust the man who owns the company trying to destroy me. Nathan didn't flinch. I'm asking you to trust the man who showed up at your door tonight. The man who heard you say you couldn't afford a cup of coffee and knew he couldn't walk away. The room fell silent, the clank of the radiator filling the space between them. Emma's world was still cracked, still fragile, still on the edge of collapse. But for the first time, she felt the possibility, terrifying, impossible, intoxicating, that she wasn't standing on that edge alone. Morning crept into the apartment like an unwelcome guest. The radiator hissed weakly against the cold, and Emma sat awake on the couch, her hands gripping the fraying blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard the landlord's voice again. Tomorrow at 9. The words echoed like a countdown, each hour drawing her closer to the moment when her world would collapse in front of her brother. Noah stirred in the bedroom, coughing softly, and Emma's chest tightened. She glanced at the clock. 7:52. Her pulse quickened. Any minute now they would come. The landlord with his smug smirk, the sheriff with his clipboard, ready to drag her life into the street. She had packed some things just in case. Noah's inhaler, the worn teddy bear he refused to sleep without, a couple bags of clothes. The rest of it, the chipped dishes, the faded books, the secondhand furniture. She had already mourned. A knock on the door jolted her upright. Too early. Her breath caught as she moved toward the door, heart hammering. But when she pulled it open, it wasn't the landlord. It was Nathan. He stood there in a black coat, his hair dusted with snow, his expression calm but resolute. Beside him was Mira Lynn, the lawyer, her briefcase tucked neatly under one arm. Emma, Nathan said quietly. It's time. Her voice trembled. Time for what? For them to throw us out? No, Mira interjected, her tone precise, clipped with confidence. Time for us to stop them. Before Emma could respond, a car pulled up to the curb outside. The landlord climbed out, his coat collar pulled high, his eyes sharp with irritation. A sheriff's cruiser followed, lights off, the officer stepping out with a clipboard in hand. Emma's stomach dropped. She moved to shut the door, panic rising in her throat, but Nathan gently pressed his hand against it, steadying her. Don't hide, he said softly. Not today. The hallway filled with footsteps and voices. The landlord approached, his smugness radiating like oil. Miss Collins, he called, it's 9 o'clock. You know why we're here. Before Emma could summon a response, Mira stepped forward, her heels clicking against the worn floor. She handed the sheriff a folder thick with documents. Not so fast. This eviction is unlawful. My client received a rent increase above the legal city cap, in direct violation of tenant protection statutes. A motion has already been filed with the court. Until this is reviewed, no eviction can proceed. The landlord's smirk faltered. This is ridiculous. We followed procedure. Nathan cut him off, his voice low but commanding, the kind of voice that silenced boardrooms. You didn't follow the law, and you knew it. The sheriff scanned the papers, his brow furrowing. After a long pause, he nodded. She's right. If the court issued a stay, I can't enforce this eviction until it's resolved. You'll have to take it up legally. The landlord sputtered, his face flushing red. You can't just... Who the hell do you think you are? He turned his glare on Nathan, clearly recognizing him now. You, Harrison? You're interfering with... I'm correcting my company's mistake, Nathan said, his eyes hard. And if you don't like it, sue me. But you won't put this woman and her brother out on the street today. Emma stood frozen, her breath trapped in her chest. She wanted to believe what she was hearing, but fear and disbelief held her like chains. The landlord cursed under his breath and stormed out, muttering about lawyers and ruined profits. The sheriff offered Emma a small nod before following. Silence fell. The hallway seemed brighter somehow, though Emma couldn't explain why. Her hands shook as she pressed them against the doorframe for support. You're safe, Mira said calmly, tucking the documents back into her briefcase. Emma turned to Nathan, her eyes wide. Safe? Her voice broke on the word. Do you understand what that means to me? Nathan's gaze softened. Yes. I do. Tears blurred her vision, hot and overwhelming. I don't even know who you are anymore. One minute you're just a man sharing coffee with me. The next you're... She struggled for words. You're the reason this was happening at all. And yet you're the reason it stopped. He didn't step closer, but his voice carried the weight of something more than business. Then let me prove which of those I want to be. Emma's throat tightened. For so long she had braced herself to face everything alone. The bills, the fear, the landlords, the endless nights. And now for the first time, someone had stood in the doorway with her, not against her. She didn't know if she could trust it, didn't know if she could trust him. But as she glanced at Noah's door, at the fragile piece behind it, she realized she wanted to try. The story of what happened outside Emma's apartment did not stay confined to the peeling walls of her building. By the following morning, it was everywhere. Someone in the neighborhood had filmed it. The sheriff reading Mira's papers, the landlord's furious sputtering, and, most unmistakably, the sight of Nathan Harrison himself standing tall in a dim hallway, defending a woman most of the world would call nobody. The video spread like wildfire. Headlines ran with it. Millionaire CEO confronts landlord at eviction, or Harrison steps into housing debate, savior or scandal. Commentators on morning shows debated his motives. Was it a publicity stunt? Was there more between him and this mystery tenant than he let on? Emma watched it unfold with a sick twist in her stomach. She saw herself in the corner of the frame, pale and exhausted, clutching Noah's hand. Her name wasn't in the headlines yet, but it was only a matter of time. Every click, every comment, every casual judgment from strangers felt like another brick added to the weight on her chest. For Nathan, the firestorm was different. The moment he stepped into the boardroom the next day, the temperature dropped. The directors sat like a row of hawks, their suits immaculate, their expressions sharpened with suspicion. They had called the emergency session less than 12 hours after the video hit the news. "Explain yourself," barked Thomas Carraway, his silver hair perfectly combed, his voice heavy with indignation. "Do you have any idea what you've done to this company? The markets are unstable this week, investors are nervous, and you decide to go play hero in front of a camera?" Nathan set his leather folder on the table, unhurried, and met their eyes. "I didn't play hero. I stopped an unlawful eviction under a company we own." Murmurs rippled around the table. One of the directors, a woman named Elaine Foster, leaned forward, her nails tapping against the polished wood. "You bypassed protocol. If Westward Properties had acted improperly, there were channels to handle it quietly. Instead, you dragged our entire brand into the mud. Now every news outlet is calling us slumlords. Do you understand the damage?" Nathan's jaw tightened. "What I understand is that a young woman and her asthmatic brother would have been on the street this morning if I hadn't intervened. And I understand that the only reason it happened is because of the way our subsidiaries operate. Unchecked, unsupervised, and unaccountable. That ends now." Carraway's eyes narrowed. "This is not a charity, Harrison. It's a business. Our job is to generate returns, not to babysit tenants who can't pay their bills." The words hit Nathan like acid. He leaned forward, his voice low but cutting through the room. "Our job is to build value, and you're too short-sighted to see that throwing people onto the street destroys value. Public trust, investor confidence, employee morale, all of it collapses the moment we prove we don't care about the people under our roofs. I will not let this company rot from greed." A stunned silence followed. For a moment, only the faint hum of the building's HVAC filled the space. Then Elaine spoke again, her voice cold. "So what's your solution? Are we to simply absorb non-paying tenants indefinitely? Do you propose we hand over profits to anyone who asks?" Nathan straightened, opening the folder he had brought. Inside were documents, projections, graphs. He slid them across the table. "My proposal is a comprehensive housing policy for every residential subsidiary under Cole Venture Group. A moratorium on evictions until audits are complete. Rent caps aligned with city regulations. A relief fund for medical hardship cases. And full transparency on tenant relations." The board erupted. Half a dozen voices shouted at once. "Insane! This is financial suicide. You're gambling with shareholder money." Nathan let them rage for a moment before speaking again, calm but immovable. "No, I'm investing in survival. Because here's what you're not seeing. The world is watching us now. Investors, regulators, journalists. We can be remembered as the company that threw a sick child onto the street, or as the company that changed the rules of the game. Which do you think is worth more in the long run?" Carraway slammed his hand against the table. "This is personal, Harrison. Don't think we don't see it. You're entangled with this tenant, whoever she is. That's why you're reckless. That's why you're dangerous." The accusation hung in the air. Nathan's eyes flashed, but he didn't deny it in the way they expected. He spoke slowly, deliberately. "You're right about one thing. It is personal. Not because of her, but because I refuse to stand by while my own company becomes a machine that grinds people into dust. If you think that disqualifies me from leading, then call your vote. But understand, I won't back down." The board sat in stunned silence, the battle lines drawn. Some looked away, shaken by his conviction. Others narrowed their eyes, already calculating how to unseat him. By the time Nathan left the meeting, the whispers of revolt were already circling. He knew the fight was only beginning. Back in her small apartment, Emma sat on the couch with Noah's head in her lap, scrolling through the endless tide of articles and comments. Her name hadn't leaked yet, but the speculation had started. Strangers on the internet were inventing her story without even knowing her face. When the door creaked open and Nathan stepped inside, she looked up at him with wide, fearful eyes. "You're risking everything for me," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, Emma, I'm risking everything for what's right. You just reminded me what that looks like." And though her chest still ached with fear, a small, dangerous part of her believed him. Emma had lived her whole life in the shadows, but shadows couldn't protect her anymore. By the end of the week, her name was no longer a secret. Someone had leaked it. Maybe a neighbor, maybe a tenant looking for their own 15 minutes of attention, maybe a reporter who pieced the puzzle together. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that now her face and her story were everywhere. She woke that morning to the sound of Noah coughing in the bedroom and the buzzing of her phone on the nightstand. At first, she thought it was the landlord again. But when she looked, her screen was flooded with dozens of notifications. Messages from numbers she didn't recognize. Emails from strangers. Social media mentions that made her stomach churn. The headline hit her like a brick. Tenant saved by millionaire CEO identified Emma Collins. Below it, a photograph. A grainy shot of her holding Noah's hand outside the apartment, her face pale, caught in the glare of a streetlight. She hadn't even realized someone was filming her, and now she was property of the public. She scrolled through the article, her throat tightening. They had everything. Her age, her work history, the story of her brother's illness, even the details of her overdue rent. They painted her as the poster child of hardship, the face of eviction in America. The writer waxed poetic about her serendipitous connection with Nathan Harrison, suggesting, with more than a hint of implication, that there was something deeper between them than kindness. Emma slammed the phone face down on the couch and pressed her palms over her eyes. Shame burned hot in her chest, mingling with fear. They had taken her life, her pain, and turned it into a narrative she couldn't control. The knock on the door nearly made her jump out of her skin. She froze, every instinct screaming to hide. But Noah appeared from the bedroom, his small face curious, and she couldn't let him see her panic. She opened the door cautiously. Nathan stood there, his expression grim. "I saw the article," he said without preamble. Emma's breath hitched. "Of course you did. Everyone has." "They'll move on," he tried to reassure her. "The press always does. Tomorrow it will be someone else." Her laugh was sharp and brittle. "Tomorrow? Do you really think this ends tomorrow? My name is out there, Nathan. My brother's name. Do you know what it feels like to see strangers dissect your life as if it's a soap opera? To have people guessing if I'm your mistress? If my child is yours?" Her voice cracked. "They don't care about truth. They care about spectacle." Nathan stepped inside, closing the door gently behind him. "Then we'll fight the spectacle. We'll make the truth louder." "You don't understand," she said, her chest heaving. "You're used to being in the spotlight. You've lived your life with cameras watching, people whispering. I haven't. I've spent my whole life trying not to be noticed. And now," she gestured helplessly at the phone, still buzzing on the couch. "Now I'm drowning." His eyes softened, but his voice stayed firm. "I told you before. I know that weight." Emma turned on him, raw and desperate. "Then why didn't you let them fire me? Why didn't you step away when you could have? If you had just let me disappear, none of this would be happening. Because disappearing doesn't solve anything," he said, his tone rising for the first time. "Because if I'd let them fire you, I'd be proving that they're right, that people like you are disposable. And you're not." Her hands trembled as she sank onto the edge of the couch, her head in her hands. "You don't know what they're going to do to you. They'll come for you next. They'll tear you apart." Nathan crouched in front of her, his voice steady, low, meant only for her. "Let them try. They can strip my title, they can smear my name, but they will not make me abandon you." Emma lifted her gaze, stunned. His words rang with such conviction it hurt to hear them. She wanted to scream at him, to tell him to stop risking everything for her, but part of her, the part that hadn't felt safe in years, wanted to believe him. She wiped at her eyes, but the tears kept falling. "I didn't ask for this," she whispered. "I just wanted to survive. I just wanted Noah to be okay." "And he will be," Nathan said, reaching out but stopping short, his hand hovering just inches from hers. "You will be, because you're not alone anymore." For a long, fragile moment, Emma let herself believe it. Let herself imagine that maybe this storm could be weathered. But when Nathan finally left that night, closing the door softly behind him, she felt the weight of the silence press in again. The storm outside was still raging, louder than ever, and she wasn't sure if hope was strong enough to keep it from swallowing her whole. The boardroom was colder than usual, though the heat vented softly from the ceiling and the sun lit the polished mahogany table with an almost deceptive glow. Emma wasn't allowed inside. She had been asked politely, then firmly, to wait in the reception lounge. But she could feel the tension bleeding through the heavy double doors. She sat there with her hands clenched in her lap, every nerve on edge. While on the other side of the wall, The men and women who controlled billions prepared to pass judgment on the man who had stood by her. Inside, the air was taut, the kind that made throats dry and tempers short. The directors sat in a semicircle like prosecutors, their files stacked neatly in front of them, their expressions sharp with disapproval. At the head of the table, Nathan stood, composed but not relaxed, his hands resting on the back of the chair he had yet to sit in. Thomas Carraway was the first to speak. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Authority radiated from him like a weapon. Mr. Harrison, let's not waste time. The company is bleeding reputation. The press has transformed us into villains. Our stock price is volatile, and the face of this circus is you. Tell me why you should remain CEO. Nathan's eyes swept the table, meeting each gaze in turn. Because my leadership isn't built on protecting my image. It's built on protecting the people this company affects. Investors, yes, but also tenants, employees, communities. I made a choice to act when one of our subsidiaries tried to evict a sick child into the snow. And if that's a scandal to you, then I'm proud to be scandalous. A ripple of anger passed through the directors. Elaine Foster leaned forward, her manicured nails tapping against her file. You've made this personal. You're entangled with this woman, this Emma Collins. Don't insult us by pretending otherwise. The photographs, the videos, the way you've appeared at her side. The public already believes the child she carries might even be yours. Nathan's expression darkened, though his voice stayed level. Speculation is not fact, and none of it changes the truth. She was wronged by a system we created. Whether I had met her or not, that injustice would remain. The only difference is that now you can't ignore it. Another director, older, with a thin face and thin patience, interjected. You've jeopardized shareholder confidence. Funds are questioning their stake in us. If we lose them, we lose everything. Your crusade might feel noble, but it is reckless. And we cannot allow one man's personal crusade to endanger an empire. Nathan straightened, his voice carrying across the table with quiet force. An empire built on exploitation is already endangered. We've operated for too long in the shadows, profiting off the desperation of people like Emma. It doesn't matter if the world didn't see it before, they see it now. And if we respond by doubling down, by abandoning her, then we confirm every accusation. We become the villains you're so afraid of being labeled as. Carraway's jaw tightened. So your solution is what? To throw away profits? To handcuff us to a bleeding heart agenda? This company is not a charity. Nathan's voice sharpened, rising just enough to slice through the room. No, this company is a legacy, and legacies are not measured only in profits. They're measured in what we leave behind, in how history remembers us. Do you want to be remembered as the board that punished compassion? As the men and women who turned their backs when a child's health was weighed against a quarterly return? The room went still. A few directors shifted in their seats, discomfort flickering across their carefully composed faces. But Carraway wasn't moved. His eyes glittered with something cold and calculating. You speak of legacy, Harrison, but legacies end. Perhaps it is time yours does. The board has the power to call a vote of no confidence. If you continue on this path, you will leave us no choice. Nathan leaned forward, his palms pressing into the table, his dark eyes locked onto Carraway's. Then call it. Hold your vote. Strip me of the title if you have the courage. But understand this. If you think I will sacrifice her to save myself, you've already forgotten who I am. I would rather walk out of this building with nothing than stay in it, having betrayed what matters most. The silence that followed was crushing. For a long moment, no one dared breathe. And then Elaine spoke again, quieter now, but no less sharp. You're gambling everything. For her, no, Nathan said, his voice steady as stone. I'm gambling everything for us. For the belief that a company can lead with integrity, that power doesn't have to mean cruelty. She reminded me of that. She reminded me that I am not just a balance sheet in a suit. Outside the boardroom, Emma sat frozen in her chair, her heart racing as the muffled voices carried through the door. She couldn't make out every word, but she could hear Nathan's tone, unwavering, fierce, unafraid. And she knew with a mixture of awe and terror that he was fighting not just for his company, but for her. When the doors finally opened, Nathan emerged. His face was carved with exhaustion, but his eyes burned with defiance. He walked straight to Emma, ignoring the glares behind him. "They're going to come after me harder now," he told her quietly, his voice for her alone. "They want me gone." Emma swallowed, her throat tight. "Because of me." "No," he said firmly, his gaze locking onto hers. "Because I wouldn't betray you." The words hit her harder than any headline. She wanted to tell him to stop, to walk away before it destroyed him, but she couldn't speak. Because in his eyes she saw a truth she couldn't deny. He had already made his choice, and nothing the board did would change it. The shareholder meeting was scheduled for a Friday morning, but the city seemed to wake hours earlier that day. Outside the glass tower of Cole Venture Group, reporters swarmed like bees, cameras flashing, microphones pointed at every suited figure who passed through the revolving doors. Security struggled to keep the crowd at bay, while on the steps, journalists shouted questions that were half accusations, half theater. Is Harrison stepping down? Who is Emma Collins to him? Will the board oust their own CEO? Emma stood across the street, hidden beneath a plain gray coat and a knitted hat pulled low over her forehead. She hadn't wanted to come, but Nathan had asked her to. "I can't fight for this if you're not there," he'd told her the night before, his voice hoarse from endless battles behind closed doors. And so she had come, though her stomach twisted with dread. She felt the weight of every camera, every whisper. But she had also seen the look in his eyes, a look that said he needed her strength as much as she needed his. Inside the auditorium, the atmosphere was suffocating. Hundreds of shareholders filled the seats, their chatter a low rumble of discontent. The board sat like a tribunal at the front, their expressions grave, their files thick with prepared statements. And then Nathan walked in. He didn't stride, didn't play the role of the unshakable CEO. He walked with measured steps, his face pale from sleepless nights, his dark hair slightly disheveled, but his eyes burned with purpose. The room quieted as he approached the podium, his figure framed by the massive screen behind him displaying the Cole Venture logo. He began without preamble. "You've all read the headlines, you've all seen the video, and you've all heard the rumors. So let me save you the trouble of speculation and give you the truth." His voice rang out, steady and unyielding. "Yes, I stopped an eviction. Yes, it involved a tenant named Emma Collins. Yes, she is pregnant. And no, the child is not mine. But that doesn't matter. What matters is that she was nearly thrown onto the street by one of our subsidiaries because we put profits above people. And I would not, stand by and let it happen." A murmur swept through the crowd, but Nathan pressed on. "I know what some of you are thinking, that this is reckless, that it damages our reputation, that it risks our bottom line. But I ask you, what is the worth of a company whose success is built on human suffering? What is the value of profit if it comes at the expense of decency?" He let the words hang in the air. He didn't pace, didn't pound the podium. He simply looked into the crowd, into the eyes of the men and women who held his future in their hands. "For too long, we've hidden behind numbers, earnings, margins, returns. But behind every number is a person, a tenant, an employee, a family. And when we treat them as disposable, we lose more than trust. We lose our soul." Caraway rose from his seat, his voice sharp. "This is not a sermon, Harrison. This is a shareholder meeting. Our duty is to maximize returns, not to play savior for people who cannot manage their lives." Nathan turned to him, his expression cold as steel. "Our duty is to lead, and leadership is not cowardice dressed in a suit. Leadership is the courage to do what is right, even when it costs us, especially when it costs us." The room was silent again, save for the faint hum of the projector. Nathan took a breath, his voice softening. "I won't pretend this is easy. It isn't. I've lost sleep, I've lost allies, and I may lose this position. But if protecting one woman and her brother from injustice is enough to strip me of this title, then I accept that. I would rather leave this company with my integrity intact than stay and be complicit in cruelty." The words hit like a hammer. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then from the back of the room, a single pair of hands began to clap. It was hesitant at first, but then it spread. Rows of shareholders rising to their feet, their applause building into a roar that shook the auditorium. Cameras flashed as the sound grew louder, echoing against the glass walls. Emma, standing near the entrance, felt her chest tighten as tears blurred her vision. She had never seen anything like it. Nathan wasn't just defending her. He was transforming her pain into a weapon, turning her story into proof that change was possible. For the first time, she didn't feel like a burden dragging him down. She felt like the reason he stood taller. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, their carefully laid plans unraveling under the weight of public approval. Caraway's face was pale with fury, but even he knew the tide had turned. A vote was called as procedure demanded, but the outcome was clear before the tally was finished. Nathan Harrison remained CEO, not because he bent to power, but because he refused to. After the meeting ended, he slipped out through a side exit, avoiding the cameras. Emma was waiting in the shadow of the alley, her hat pulled low, her hands trembling. When he saw her, his shoulders sagged with relief. "You heard," he said, his voice rough. She nodded, unable to speak, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. He reached for her hands, holding them gently. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring. The fight isn't over. But today we won." Emma let out a shaky laugh through her tears. "You didn't just win for me, you won for all of them." Nathan's eyes softened. "No, Emma, we won. Because you're the reason I remembered what's worth fighting for." She pressed her forehead to his chest, the weight of fear and exhaustion melting away, if only for that moment. Around them, the city roared with headlines and speculation, but in that quiet space between them, there was only truth. For the first time in years, Emma felt the future open before her, not as a cliff's edge, but as a path. A hard path, an uncertain one, but one she no longer had to walk alone. This wasn't a love story in the traditional sense. Not just about two people finding each other, but about what happens when truth collides with power. Emma's simple, almost humiliating confession, "I can't afford coffee," was the spark that tore away the polished surface of a corporate empire and forced a millionaire CEO to remember that behind every number is a human being. For Nathan, the ending isn't about keeping his title or winning applause at the shareholder meeting. It's about making the conscious choice to measure success differently. Not by profits, but by integrity, by the courage to protect the vulnerable even when it costs everything. His victory is not that he stayed CEO, but that he stayed human. For Emma, the journey is even more profound. She began as someone who thought survival meant invisibility, that silence was the only shield she had. But in the end, her voice, her honesty, her refusal to hide, became the very thing that changed lives. The world tried to make her into a scandal, a headline, a rumor. Instead, she became a catalyst. What I love most about this ending is that it doesn't promise perfection. The world still judges, the press still twists, and the fight isn't magically over. But the two of them face it side by side, choosing hope over fear, compassion over indifference. That, to me, is the shock of the story in the best sense. Not that a millionaire CEO fell in love with a struggling girl, but that both chose to rewrite what power and survival mean together.